Hollow Knight Silksong is the breakout success that puts most AAA devs to shame. On the 4th of September 2025, the games industry experienced something so unusual that even seasoned journalists struggled to describe it properly. Hollow Knight Silksong, the long-awaited sequel to Team Cherry's 2017 hit, didn't simply release to a warm reception, it set off what can only be described as a shockwave through the entire ecosystem of digital distribution, marketing, and consumer expectations. As the industry report on the launch stated directly, it didn't just break player count records, it fundamentally challenged the established order of modern game development and pricing. In a marketplace defined by billion-dollar budgets, endless marketing cycles, and $80 price tags that are increasingly edging towards $100, here is a $20 indie title from a 3-person studio in Adelaide, Australia, that has managed to bring entire digital storefronts crashing down. So, let's take a look at exactly why. I am Lady Decade. If you like spicy gaming industry coverage, then hit subscribe, because this is why Hollow Knight Silksong is destroying the AAA competition. The AAA industry might be collapsing under its own weight, but players clearly don't care. They're flocking to the games that actually deliver. Case in point, the hottest release around, Hollow Knight Silksong, which, using my link below, can be yours with a huge 19% off. And the discounts don't stop there. Black Myth Wukong is down 40%, Mafia the Old Country by 24%, Elden Ring Night Reign by 22%, and Expedition 33, a frankly absurd 43%. Stellar Blade 29%, and even Wu Chang Fallen Feathers comes with a chunky cut. So don't be a mug paying full retail price. Fill up your basket, save a fortune, and actually enjoy gaming again. Links are below. Happy shopping, and now back to the video. To say the Hollow Knight Silksong launch has been a success would be an understatement. Steam, PlayStation Network, Xbox Live, and the Nintendo eShop all faltered within minutes of the global release, a failure that wasn't the result of a security breach or technical incompetence, but of sheer overwhelming demand. Social media timelines filled instantly with screenshots of error codes, memes poking fun at the chaos, and, in the words of Christopher Larkin, the series composer, jokes that the team might have crashed the internet. But the juiciest parts of this story may perhaps be that this launch frenzy is not merely a cultural curiosity, but a direct confrontation with the exact same assumptions that have guided mainstream game publishing for over 2 decades. So, what exactly do we mean by this? Basically, the expectation has long been that only vast studios with hundreds of staff and marketing budgets larger than Hollywood films could dominate the release calendar. Yet, on that September afternoon just a few days ago, a team that had once begun their journey eating leftover sandwiches from neighbouring offices, after modest Kickstarter success, became the most powerful force in gaming. This is an intriguing moment that, for many, is less about a single release, but more about the dawning realisation that the industry's centre of gravity might finally be shifting away from unsustainable AAA production and further towards something leaner, more authentic, and, above all else, more sustainable. But to truly understand why Silksong struck such a nerve, we have to go back a few years to this franchise's most unlikely of beginnings. Before they were hailed as the creators of one of the most acclaimed indie games ever made, Ari Gibson and William Pellon were simply 2 friends in Adelaide who have an affection for classic Nintendo adventures. Their journey started not in a boardroom or a studio with venture capital, but at a modest game jam. In the long-gone year of 2013, Gibson invited Pellon to join him in the Ludum Dare competition under the theme 10 Seconds, and together they produced a quirky little arcade experiment called Hungry Night. In this title, players guided a bug-like character around a small arena, with 10 seconds given to defeat an enemy before the time ran out, failed to strike quickly enough, and the character died. It was a simple premise, but proof that sometimes the simplest of ideas can carry the strongest spark, and it laid the groundwork for what would follow. The game itself was tiny, even forgettable in the broader context of Game Jam entries, but in hindsight it contained all the building blocks of something extraordinary. The Bug Knight, rough around the edges in Hungry Knight, would evolve into the instantly recognisable silhouette of the Hollow Knight himself, while the collaboration between Gibson and Pellon revealed a creative chemistry that neither had fully appreciated before. The pair went on to formalise their partnership as Team Cherry, joined later by Jack Vine, and grounded their creative vision not in the contemporary influences that critics often projected onto their work, such as the Souls series, but in the games that they had loved since childhood. They are open about drawing experience from NES classics such as The Legend of Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, Mega Man and, of course, Metroid. Iconic games that helped define an era. With Hollow Knight, it seemed their ambition was not to reinvent the wheel, but to recapture the sense of discovery and challenge those games had provided and deliver it through a modern lens of refinement. What's refreshing to hear, though, is that even in the creators' earliest days working on the franchise, it seems it was never about spectacle or corporate ambition. In their conquest to make something more fun and pure, Team Cherry wanted to create the kind of adventure that honoured the past, while speaking directly to players who valued craft and sincerity over the trappings of big-budget production. So, keeping all of this in mind, it's not surprising that Hollow Knight stands in such stark contrast to most other prominent releases. From the unassuming foundations of a game jam, a prototype nobody expected to live beyond a weekend, came the seeds of a global phenomenon that would not only change the lives of its developers but would, in time, send tremors through the entire gaming industry. When the first Hollow Knight finally emerged in 2017, few could have predicted just how far its reach would extend. What began as a modestly scoped Kickstarter project had grown into one of the most celebrated indie titles of the decade, and eventually into a cultural touchstone that transcended the usual boundaries of a niche Metroidvania enthusiasm. Over the years, it has sold more than 15 million copies across platforms, a figure that places it on the same commercial footing as some of Nintendo's flagship Pokémon titles, an almost unthinkable achievement for a game built by a 3-person studio in Adelaide. Critical reception bordered on reverent. IGN's 2018 review concluded with the striking observation that it does not reinvent, it refines, it does not rebuild, it polishes. Destructoid, meanwhile, dispensed with a nuance altogether, declaring simply that the game was a masterpiece of gaming. And these weren't just empty plaudits, they reflected an almost universal critical consensus around the game. In fact, OpenCritic calculated that 99% of reviewers recommended the title, placing it in the 99th percentile of all games ever scored. That's some big accolades from the little developers from Adelaide. How could anyone not love this title? The game's haunting subterranean world was rich with atmosphere and meticulous detail, every frame of animation infused with character, every boss fight demanding precision, and every corner of Hallow Nest whispering secrets that rewarded curiosity. What players responded to most was not just a challenge or beauty, but a sense of integrity. Team Cherry demonstrated that a small studio could achieve extraordinary polish without bowing to the cynicism of modern monetization or the hollow excesses of AAA production. This was a game that treated its audience with respect, offering immense value for money and depth without compromise. The resonance was so strong that even years after release, when Silksong had been announced but not yet delivered, millions continued buying and playing Hollow Knight. In fact, 12 of its 15 million sales came after 2019, proving that anticipation for the sequel fed directly back into love for the original. In retrospect, the weight of Hollow Knight's legacy is proof that authenticity, patience and craft can still thrive in an industry that too often forgets the value of those qualities. I'm looking at you, Concord. With the release of Hollow Knight serving as a pretext, the release of Hollow Knight Silksong was not just a successful launch. It was a digital pandemonium on a scale the industry had never seen before. So, let's dig deeper into the satisfying chaos that would unfold. When it came to Silksong's launch, Team Cherry made the unusual choice to avoid pre-orders or pre-loading, meaning that when the game went live on the 4th of September 2025, every single prospective player around the world clicked purchase at exactly the same time. This was compounded by a global simultaneous release across time zones, ensuring there would be no staggered rollout to spread the demand. The result was, of course, immediate and total chaos. Within seconds, Steam collapsed under the weight of requests, throwing out the dreaded "something went wrong" errors en masse. The Nintendo eShop buckled with error code after error code, PlayStation Store pages failed to even register that the game was available, and Xbox's infrastructure, usually the most resilient of the major platforms, slowed to a crawl. Even Humble Bundle posted a notice saying that the game was unavailable due to high demand, while SteamDB, the popular third-party statistics tracker, crashed under the sheer number of people trying to monitor the carnage. In fact, the scale of the disruption was so vast that mainstream media quickly took notice. The BBC technology correspondent described how major online video game retailers experienced significant outages as they struggled to accommodate the overwhelming interest in Hollow Knight Silksong, one of the year's most eagerly awaited titles. Yet, rather than souring the mood, the chaos became part of Silksong's legend. Fans shared stories of finally beating the hardest boss when their purchases went through, while hashtags like #Silksong broke the internet trended worldwide. What could have been remembered as one of gaming's most frustrating technical failures instead became the ultimate proof of demand, a cultural moment where a small Australian studio commanded such anticipation that it broke the systems designed to contain it. What an amazing feel-good story, especially in an industry that has been feeling increasingly negative lately. Better still, it's a reminder that brilliance doesn't need a blockbuster budget or a £70 price tag. Sometimes the games made with the least money can end up meaning the most. And speaking of pricing, it provides yet another perfect reason to celebrate this monumental release. If the launch day chaos revealed just how much demand existed for Silksong, it was the price tag that truly sent tremors through the industry. In an era where major publishers are steadily pushing standard prices to $70 or $80, Team Cherry's decision to sell their long-awaited sequel for just $19.99 was nothing short of shocking. The move sparked intense debate among developers, analysts, and players alike, not only because it was seen as extraordinarily generous, but because of what it implied about the future value of games. RJ Lake, director of the rhythm adventure title Unbeatable, articulated what many developers were privately worried about. As he put it, "They can price however low they want. Their return on investment is infinite no matter what they do, but by charging such a low amount, they are causing lizard brain signals to fire off, saying this kind of game is worth $20. His observation pointed to a fundamental truth: Team Cherry's unique financial position, having already earned enormous profits from the original Hollow Knight, gave them a freedom almost no other indie studio enjoys. They could afford to set the price without worrying about recouping costs, but in doing so they risked resetting consumer expectations for the entire indie sector. From the perspective of players, however, the price is irresistible. When blockbuster studios are charging increasingly more for experiences that often launch unfinished or riddled with monetization schemes, Team Cherry has released one of the most anticipated games in the world at a price point many considered a bargain. A surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. While the deal might sound one-sided on the surface, industry veterans quickly recognise the strategy behind the generosity. Mike Rose, the founder of indie publisher No More Robots, put it bluntly: they definitely could have gone $25, but this way they are essentially cementing Silksong as being a gigantic success before it even launches by making it a steal. In other words, the price itself was part of the marketing, a way of ensuring that no one could reasonably hesitate to pick it up, and that the conversation around the game would be as much about its value as its artistry. However, for all the admiration, the decision also exposed a tension at the heart of modern indie development. Most small studios simply cannot afford to set their prices this low without risking financial collapse, and there has been a fear that players might begin to see $20 as the correct correct benchmark for ambitious indie titles. Whether this represents an act of generosity or a dangerous precedent remains debatable, but what is clear is that, in one stroke, Team Cherry forced the entire industry to reconsider how games are priced and how value itself is defined in a market where budgets and expectations are spiralling ever higher, providing the AAA games industry yet another reason to fear these almighty indie hits. If the $20 price point rattled nerves across the industry, the player numbers drove the point home with even greater force. On Steam alone, Silksong reached a peak of 587,150 concurrent players within days of release, placing it among the top 20 games in the platform's history. That achievement becomes all the more remarkable when placed against the backdrop of the modern AAA landscape plagued by over-budget failures and dwindling audiences. The starkest example came, of course, from Sony's embarrassing Concord disaster, the infamous hero shooter that reportedly cost more than $400 million to produce over an 8-year development cycle. Despite that staggering budget and years of hype, the game managed to launch at a peak of just 697 concurrent players, according to Steam DB data. Put it another way, Silksong, built by 3 developers and sold for $20, achieved more than 800 times the engagement of a project that represented the cutting edge of AAA ambition. If that's not embarrassing for the likes of Sony and company, then I'm not sure what is. Warner Bros. Faced a similar humiliation in the same year with Suicide Squad's Kill the Justice League. The game carried an estimated $200 million budget, but even with the backing of a famous comic book license and years of marketing, it peaked at only 13,459 concurrent players at launch. Industry analysis was quick to point out the comparison. Silksong's numbers weren't just good for an indie game, they dwarfed some of the most expensive releases of the modern era. The broader picture is equally damning for the entire AAA sector. A Bain & Company report summarised the embarrassing trend, concluding that AAA video game studios are caught in a pincer movement between the runaway success of indie developers and the gravitational pull of massive live service platform games. While AAA budgets spiral to unsustainable levels, often reaching $300 or $400 million once marketing is included, the returns no longer match the risk. Meanwhile, indie developers operating with a fraction of the overhead are consistently capturing both market share and player goodwill through innovation, authenticity, and pricing strategies that respect their audiences. This contrast does more than embarrass the corporate giants, it calls into question the sustainability of the entire AAA model. The hilarious truth is that when 3 people in Adelaide can command nearly 600,000 players on launch day, where multinational publishers struggle to break 5 figures with projects costing hundreds of millions, it becomes clear that the market itself is changing. The bigger is better philosophy that defined the industry for decades is beginning to collapse under its own weight. And Silksong has provided the most striking evidence yet that the future may belong to those who choose craft over scale. Perhaps the most striking contrast between Team Cherry and their AAA counterparts lies in how the game was actually made. While large studios have become synonymous with crunch culture, where employees are pushed into 60 to 80-hour work weeks in the final months of development, Team Cherry charted a completely different course. Their small size and financial independence gave them the freedom to work at their own pace, and they embraced that freedom not just as a practical necessity but as a creative philosophy. Speaking to Jason Schreier at Bloomberg, Ari Gibson describes their process with disarming simplicity. "We've been having fun. This whole thing is just a vehicle for our creativity anyway. It's nice to make fun things." For Gibson and his colleagues, development was not a gauntlet of deadlines and corporate demands, but an ongoing act of discovery that they genuinely enjoyed. The game may have taken years longer than anyone anticipated, but for Team Cherry, that time was an opportunity, not a burden. Industry analysts were quick to recognise the significance of this attitude. David G. Schwartz remarked that it must have taken tremendous discipline not to go into crunch mode to appease the fans demanding the game, but Team Cherry did it. The fact that Team Cherry resisted this pressure not only spared their team the exhaustion so common in the industry, but arguably improved the financial product by allowing ideas to mature without the distortions of panic and burnout. In an industry where suffering has become strangely conflated with dedication, Team Cherry demonstrated that it is possible to achieve excellence without self-destruction. Their philosophy was not about speed or appeasing investors, but about nurturing a process that remained enjoyable from start to finish, and in the end, that approach produced one of the most successful indie launches in history. Proof that healthier methods of development are not just possible, but in many cases, superior. When examining what Silksong represents in the broader context of modern gaming, it becomes clear that its triumph is not just about numbers or novelty, but about what players are choosing to value. The runaway success of a $20 indie Metroidvania alongside other innovative mid-budget titles demonstrates that authenticity itself has become a premium. In other words, players are rewarding studios not for how much they spend, but for how much they care. Silksong has shown in no uncertain terms that the audience is shifting away from spectacle for its own sake and towards artistry and integrity, a change that may well shape the future of gaming more than any technological leap or marketing campaign. What Silksong ultimately represents is not just about the triumph of a single studio, but a fork in the road for the entire industry. It stands as both blueprint and warning. It demonstrates how much can be achieved when craft is prioritized over commerce, but it also highlights the risks for studios unwilling or unable to adapt. If billion-dollar publishers continue down the path of excess while ignoring the signals being sent by their own players, they may find themselves increasingly irrelevant in a marketplace that has already begun to shift. Conversely, those willing to embrace the lessons of Team Cherry, small teams, sustainable practices, fair pricing and authentic engagement may discover a way forward that restores faith in an industry many players had grown weary of. The success of Silksong proves that the future belongs not just to those who can spend the most, but to those who can inspire the most, and for that, it should be celebrated. The AAA industry may be crumbling under its own bloated weight, but players are voting with their wallets and choosing the games that actually deliver. Don't forget that Hollow Knight Silksong can be yours with a hefty 19% off through my link below, and that's just the start. Black Myth Wukong is slashed by 40%, Mafia the Old Country by 24%, Elden Ring Night Train by 22%, Expedition 33, a frankly ridiculous 43% off, Stellar Blade 29%, and even Wu Chang Fallen Feathers is sitting there with a serious discount. So why pay retail for mediocrity when you can save a fortune and actually enjoy gaming again? Every purchase goes towards helping this channel, and if you want to support what I do in a more personal way and access my behind the scenes cosplay library and more over on Patreon, and I'll see you all again soon.